I'm Martha Lane Fox, and I have two amazing jobs. I am Chancellor of the Open University, and I am President of the British Chambers of Commerce. So I'm absolutely thrilled to bring to you this podcast series about skills and business. And today we're going to talk about the Business Skills Challenge in small and medium-sized businesses. But a lot to unpick here, and I'm thrilled to have my guest, Anthony Impey, to talk the subjects through. Anthony, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Really pleased to be here.
Can you tell me a bit about, first of all, why you come to this subject? I know you run an organisation. Tell us a bit about that and why this is an area that you know a lot about.
So I'm Chief Executive of an organisation called Be The Business. We're an independent charity that is the UK's leading expert on small business productivity. We're an independent charity, and as a result, we do sort of three core things. One is we research and drive innovation in how to help businesses become more productive. We do a lot of work around sharing and promoting what we know through publishing reports with people and hosting events. And crucially, we work directly with small businesses. So we really understand what's involved in building a small business. And in the course of doing that work, we've added £500 million, £500 million to the productivity of those firms we've worked with. And I sort of come to the subject matter having spent my entire career starting and growing my own businesses. So I like to call Be The Business my first proper job, because before that I was an entrepreneur, which is probably a vocation rather than a job. And so
not a choice. Some people describe it as not a choice.
It sometimes feels like that when you're in it. But certainly I think it's given me a really comprehensive understanding of what it's really like to be a business leader within the UK, and all the good things that come from being a small business leader, and some of those monumental challenges that sort of you face and normally you wrestle with at 4 a.m. in the morning when you wake up in a cold sweat thinking, how am I going to overcome this challenge? So I've built businesses, and in all those businesses I've always felt that skills have been fundamentally important to the success of those ventures. And I've been involved in the skills system. I do some work with the Department for Education. I run the Apprenticeship Ambassador Network for the Department for Education, because I really think that if we want to drive growth in this country, we've got to tap into the vast potential that we have here. And you do that through skills training and development.
Well, you're certainly the right person to be unpicking this subject with, and we're thrilled to have you. I think the thing that I have really been somewhat surprised by in my travels around the country as president of the British Chambers is the unbelievable kind of uniformity of crisis that people tell me about in the skills that they are lacking in their businesses or can't find, or it's everything from recruitment, retraining, to retention. So I think this is a mammoth issue for the country, and one of the things that we've got to work out how to unlock in order to really grow the economy and therefore deliver all the other things that we want to do as a society. So it's really important. And the OU's Business Barometer, that the work that they've done to check on this kind of stuff shows, I think, that 84% of small and medium-sized businesses don't think that they have the skills that they need. And that is obviously a vast number. So we can delve into some of that in a moment. But first of all, I know that you have some beef with some of the terminology around this stuff. So do you want to just explain a bit about how you see SMEs and what you think they are and why it might be a good or not such a good term?
Yeah, so first of all, I always struggle with the term SME. It always feels like quite a technical description.
Yes.
And I think it's far more important to recognise that these are business leaders, and that maybe they're running slightly smaller firms than the big businesses that are listed in the stock market. But these are exceptionally talented, exceptionally hardworking individuals. In the course of last year, I went around the country and visited 100 small businesses, and I was really struck by the level of dedication and the level of resilience that these business leaders had, and they are equal, if not greater than, the skills that I see in much larger organisations. And that's not to put down sort of our colleagues in larger organisations, but I just think it's quite important that we recognise that small business leaders are quite exceptional people that very often make huge personal sacrifices, very often put all their personal assets on the line. The stories of entrepreneurs who mortgage the family
Yes.
home in order to fund the business is a story that we're both familiar with. And so I think it's really important that we recognise just how exceptional they are, and that actually some of the challenges that small businesses face by maybe not investing in the skills they need isn't because small business leaders don't know that that's an important thing, but they're wrestling with lots of other issues that mean that actually it's often very difficult or impossible for them to make those decisions. And I think what's really important is when we talk about skills, it's about how do we equip those business leaders with the things that they need so that they do have the headspace to say, actually, I can do this. I can confidently make this investment. It will return.
Yes.
It will deliver a return on the investment. So I think it's just quite important that we shift the narrative to, how do we help these poor small business leaders to saying these are exceptional people and we need to help them, because if we can help them, that's going to unlock sort of the growth potential of the country.
I think that's a really nice reframing. Someone who's always tried to start things, sometimes successfully, sometimes very unsuccessfully. I really recognise that characteristic of people who are, wrestling with a huge number of competing priorities. And you need the skills. You maybe have the gaps in the business, but investing in the training feels like a big ask when you might also be wrestling with heating the entire office right now.
Yeah, especially at the moment. I think. If you think about March 2020 was a real sort of
Yes,
it was a watershed
I think we do remember that moment.
It was like pre March 2020 and then post March 2020.
Yes. And how would you characterise that difference?
So I think that before all the lockdowns, small businesses were already really struggling with skills. Like the skills crisis that we're facing today is not new news. It was there before.
It's been a very continual decline into a crisis.
Yeah, I think what's happened now is that lockdowns, supply chain disruptions, geopolitical unrest, huge amounts of uncertainty, economically, politically, inflation. The list is a long one.
Yeah.
And I think what it's done is it's taken a pre-existing skills crisis and made it all the more difficult. But I think on the plus side, if you can see positivity in that situation, I think that business leaders have become a whole lot more resilient. I think I talked to I went to see a carpentry business in Birmingham, just outside Birmingham city centre, and
how many people? Paint us a picture.
So seven people.
Right.
It was a freezing cold warehouse. I had like multiple layers on. It was very cold, and we were sitting in the little office next to the workshop, and we were talking about sort of the challenges this business had faced. So all the challenges that I've mentioned, they also had a huge amount of stock that was stuck in the Suez Canal. When the Evergreen got stuck in the...
that was really like, you can't believe that those kinds of things have such a profound impact down the chain, doesn't it? A huge boat, stuck for ages, people completely screwed.
It delayed all their projects by 3 months because it's not just the amount of time, it's the backlog.
It's the backlog,
So you had that, the price of... The plywood was one of their main products, and because of the war in Ukraine, and because Ukraine was such a big producer of timber, the cost of their plywood sheets had gone up 4 times, but the quality had gone down four grades. So it's like a compound effect of 16 times. And, in the face of those kind of conditions, you think, lots of people would say, I'm done here. I'm going to pack up, go home. And actually what this business leader said was, you know what, we've navigated these problems, and now we feel really resilient and really capable of addressing any kind of uncertainty. And so I think, when I kind of put skills into that context, I think businesses are saying, it's difficult. Yes. But we can work our way through it, which is probably something we didn't have before March 2020. March 2020, the skill, we can't find the people we need. But I think small businesses are now saying, okay, we can't find the people we need. So what do we need to do in order to fill that gap.
And what are some of the things you're seeing that are successful in in how people are addressing the challenges they face?
So a great example is a manufacturing business in the northeast who was looking for engineers. So there's this huge shortage of engineers in the country as a whole. In the northeast, it's even more acute because you have large businesses that are hoovering up a lot of the engineering talent. So it's quite difficult for smaller businesses to compete with larger employers, especially when larger employers might have more scope to offer higher wages. And this particular business sort of formed a local consortium with other small manufacturers in the area that needed engineers, connected to a local college. And they've kind of created an informal collaboration that allows these businesses to create a core of engineering talent. And I think I see these sort of pockets springing up around the country. And I'm quite hopeful that things like the local skills improvement partnerships that the government's launched, I'm hoping that they're going to unlock that kind of hyper-localized initiative where employers can come together in order to address some of the challenges, because so many of the challenges occur at the local level. They're local business, not even regional problems, but local skills challenges that really need addressing. So I'm hoping that local skills improvement plans are sort of help to systemize, that example of the manufacturing business in the northeast.
Yeah, I've heard quite repeatedly that those local skills improvement plans have been a successful policy and are actually working, which is great to hear, because often you hear skills initiatives which have dragged on for ages. They've gone round and round, and actually not much has been improved because of them. The British Chamber of Commerce did a bunch of work on people and skills that we launched in Coventry about a month ago, and one of those things that we were very clear about was just supporting the LSIPs and making sure that they're well funded and that they continue to drive that, as you say, that very local agenda. Because, if you are one of those small businesses in a cold warehouse in the middle of the countryside, you're not going to be necessarily connected up at a national level to some of those things. You want to feel like you've got that very local help.
Yeah. It's just lots of examples that spring to mind. I went to see a business that does electric motors for the water industry. So super niche. And
although I would imagine there's quite a lot of necessity for electric motors in the water industry.
Yes. How
big again?
So this was an 80 employee business, so reasonable size manufacturing business. The big problem they had is that because of the size of the motors, you have to hand wire, you have to hand loom the copper, or they are hand looming the copper. I mean, it's a labour-intensive process.
That's interesting. So there's nothing automated in that.
Not automated yet, and they're struggling to find the engineering talent they need to build the motors. Again, interestingly,
so it's engineering again.
Interesting that particular organisation had created an international collaboration. So this particular business owner had found a business doing the same thing in Barcelona, another one in Eastern Europe, and so they were sharing know-how.
They were building
between
that network.
And so that's kind of, I think, very powerful way to address some of these challenges.
A couple of other topics I'd love to get your perspective on. The first is just about investment in skills and how to, again, as you say, kind of change the narrative for small and medium-sized businesses that this is not a cost. This is actually a piece of investment that is going to lead to productivity. Where have you built that case successfully, and how do we help small businesses navigate, really competing priorities and difficult, we've got people saying, we need to invest in AI. How do we invest in the latest software? We've got to invest in our supply chain. We've got to invest in the green transition. We've got all of these competing different priorities. How do you position that skills investment, and where have you seen it work best?
So we at Be the Business, we conduct we run an index called the Productive Business Index that looks at the productivity of small businesses across the country. And so we're measuring what businesses have done and what they intend to do.
Yeah.
And last year we we expanded the reach of the survey to all businesses across the G7. So we have comparative data for the UK, and then France, Germany, Italy, USA, Canada, and Japan.
And just to stop you a second there, because that's really interesting, just to educate me and listeners as well. I know that SMEs, that slightly clunky term, but we'll go with it, make up about 85% of our economy. Is that the same in most G7 countries?
Broadly the same, like some variation, but broadly the same. You have small businesses. I almost use the SME. I think I've used the SME term. I think I've broken my own rules.
I think I'm still using it. I'm not being very.
We might have to restart. So yes, broadly the same. The typical sort of composition of businesses, similar breakdown in terms of micro businesses, so businesses under 5 employees, and those smaller businesses that are sort of 5 to 49, and then the medium size 49 above. So we looked at the data. We looked at the data, UK versus its international peers, and we found that across all businesses, business leaders were similarly confident. So they were confident about their abilities in skills, in leadership, in innovation, in investment, all the things that we know drive good productivity. What we found in the UK is a significant gap between the level of confidence and the intention to do something about it, that didn't exist in our international peers. So the gap in the UK in, say, leadership and management is 3 times bigger than that in Italy, for example. So Italian small business leaders say, we are confident about our leadership and management capabilities, and we are investing in training our leadership and management in the skills they need. Whereas in the UK, we're confident about the skills, but then we don't do the investment.
That's interesting, isn't it? Why is that, would you say? What is it culturally, the difference here?
I think that is the big question that we're
pretend we're prime minister for a moment. Heaven forbid, in my case. But what would you hone in on? Take into that.
I mean, the job might be up for grabs at some point. So I mean, I wouldn't rule yourself out.
No, well, I think that's not what I'm going to announce on this podcast series.
I mean, that would get us a lot of listeners. So I've forgotten what the question is. No, the question is how we do the...
Well, culturally, why it is in the UK that gap is so pronounced. It's not a little one, it's a big one you've just described.
So I think there is a tendency for us to look at a problem and go, oh, we can create a new initiative that addresses this problem. And so we've got lots and lots of initiatives to help.
Initiative-itis.
Yeah. And I think we're looking at the wrong part of the problem, because actually that's saying, well, the reason these business leaders aren't doing something is because there's not the initiatives or the programs, but actually they are there. The problem that we've got is a demand side problem. It's business leaders not having the confidence or the headspace to make those decisions. So we think that the problem is a behaviour change problem. Is actually, how do we address this? How do we address the demand side? And we see it in skills. We see it in investment as well. The UK is quite a good environment to raise money if you're running a business. Really good if you're a startup. I think we've got one of the best.
And that's changed immeasurably in the last 20 years. It's one of the things I think we can really point to success in. It's hard. It's still hard being a startup, but it is different. So I think that should give us confidence we can change the dial in other areas.
I agree. I mean, I remember when I started my entrepreneurial journey, being an entrepreneur was not a credible career.
No, it was nuts. In fact, I would go as far as saying.
Yeah, I mean, all my friends were going to work. The same for you. You're going to work in the city,
that was where,
or advertising.
Yes, advertising was the place everyone went when I was.
And then you'd say, oh, well, I'm going to start my own business. And they're like, are you crazy? Why wouldn't you go and work for a big blue chip business? So, and I think that world has totally changed. And so it's a really good place if you're a startup. I think we haven't quite got the growth funding environment right. I think it can be a little bit difficult if you're if you're a business with 50 to 100 people and you've kind of had quite steady growth, and maybe you don't want to have private equity investment, or you're not quite big enough to attract private equity, but you're a bit too big for venture and your growth. We need to get that right. But even that is reasonably well served. The big challenge I think we have with investment, and it's I think it's the same for skills, is that businesses aren't ready to attract the finance. They don't have the right structure in place in order to be able to go and raise money. And I think
so just bring that back to skills, just to dig us a bit deeper into that one. What do you mean? What's the behavioural change that is going to help in the skills agenda?
So I think we've got to make it easier for businesses to navigate the skills system.
Yeah.
I think we've got a really robust skills system, and arguably we've got, our apprenticeship system is probably as good as, if not better than, Switzerland and Germany and Austria, which are often sort of positioned as the gold standards of apprenticeships. And actually, we've got a pretty good apprenticeship system, but it's quite difficult to navigate. And that's fine if you're a big blue chip company.
You've got the resources that can do that.
You've got an HR department. You might have somebody who's dedicated to doing manage your apprenticeships, because you've got hundreds of them. But if you're a small business leader and you've just, you've started work at 7 and you're just finishing at 10 o'clock at night, and at 10 o'clock at night you think, somebody said that I need to work on my business, not in my business. So you've got 30 minutes before you collapse from exhaustion.
And then you just hear that a boat's got stuck in the Suez and your whole business has changed anyway.
It's that's the reality of what it's like to run a small business.
Yeah.
So if we want businesses to use the skill system and really tap all the resources there, we've got to make it super easy for them to navigate it and get the resources they need. So I think there's a piece.
And where does that happen? Do you think? I mean, obviously, I would say that the Open University is a great place for that. I would say the British Chamber of Commerce is a great place.
I've heard they're both great places for that.
But how much is government part of it? How much do you think it has to come, kind of, if you like, from the businesses themselves versus from the macro organisations that can help?
I think it's probably all the above.
Yeah.
I think it's. I'm a big fan of businesses learning from one another.
Yes.
And so.
Have you seen that again? Have you seen examples of where that works well?
I've seen some big businesses. Lloyds Bank is a great example of a business that other banks are available. I've seen Lloyds Bank, take their, superb understanding of the apprenticeship system and help businesses they work with navigate through the system.
Yeah.
And that's a great sharing of knowledge. So I think there's a bit of sharing of knowledge. I think there's also a bit of peers working with one another. So another small business that has nailed the skill system, talking to another business leader to say, actually, the complexity is there, but actually you can, if you do this, and this helps navigate. So I think there's a piece around big businesses helping small businesses and businesses helping one another that I think is really important. And that's not as shiny as a new initiative. But we're talking about behaviour change, and behaviour change is difficult and complicated and relies on trusted relationships to say, oh, well, if you want to do this, if you've got this gap in your organisation, why don't you try this, because it's worked for me, and so it could work for you. So I think that, that businesses, we use this phrase in Be the Business, of businesses like mine doing things that I can do, I think is really important.
I really like that. I mean, the networks that you create and how you use them and how you find your peers is always going to be one of the best ways of learning and sharing, isn't it? One of the last things I'd like to touch on is, I was struck in the Business Barometer, the OU's Business Barometer, that only 31% of so-called SMEs have got succession plans in place and are thinking about retirement. And, there's a really interesting, rich topic, I think, here about, we've got a massively ageing workforce. We're going to live much longer. I've got 7-year-old identical twins, and I think about this all the time, that it's very likely, partly because they have a relatively privileged background and all of that, that they will live to probably 120, 130. It's not impossible. What's a working life in that? Businesses are going to have to think dramatically differently about how they plan a career, how they plan their own succession within a business, how they think about the aging workforce. Have you got any experience of that? How do you think about that?
There's lots of things there. I think there's something really interesting about an older workforce.
Yes.
I think it's if we get that right as a country, it's tapping into an amazing pool of talent.
Could be a massive competitive advantage globally.
Incredible. And I think on one hand, it's great news that we are all going to live a longer life and
Hopefully healthier. I mean,
and
that's
and and a healthier life.
Yeah.
But actually, there's we're in a very different age to, well, I'm certainly in a very different age to my grandparents.
Yes.
And so so that's the positive. The challenge is, okay, so what does that look like? And actually, how can you help people be economically active longer if they want to, but actually create the right environment? I think if we can do that, that's incredible. I think small businesses have a big part to play in that, because they employ half the private sector workforce in this country, so they are really important. So equipping them with the knowledge to be able to keep members of their staff in their business longer, I think, is really important. But I think that point around succession is a really interesting one. And I've worked with lots of family-owned businesses where actually the business isn't a asset that you build and sell. It's an asset that is part of the family heritage and that you build up and pass to the next generation. And I've seen really good examples of that being done well.
Can you give us one?
Well, I can give you two, actually.
Even better.
The first is a food distribution business that is, I think, in its third generation, taken over by a brother and sister. And
if my brother is listening, we are never going to run a business together.
Right.
He's done it before,
Okay.
sort of. He worked at lastminute.com, but I'm always amazed. He's amazing. He's much better than me.
Yeah.
But I think it is really intense to have that family dynamic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Business?
Yeah,
Sorry,
well, my last business I ran with my wife.
There you go.
And lots of people go, "Oh, how did you do that?" It's like, well, we did it. It worked really well for us, and
you're still together.
And we're still together, which is 25 years and counting. So
amazing.
So
she's obviously incredible.
Yeah. Yes. Well, she is. And
Sorry. So the food distribution business, brother and sister.
Brother and sister. They've taken over the business, and actually, they. I think one of them was a lawyer. I think, and the other was maybe a consultant. I can't remember. But they've come into the business, brought their outside skills into the business, and have transformed that organisation. And it's a great example of a business applying the principle of marginal gains to their business. When we talk about productivity,
yes,
we say it's not about, there's not a moment
where suddenly 50% happens.
Yeah. It's like a series of, and they've done that through everything they do. Through they do audio stock picking, so their staff have headsets, because that's a much more, they can shave 3 seconds off the time it takes to pick somebody, because somebody's not looking at a pad. So they do that to the time it takes to recycle the cardboard from their stocking. It's incredible what they've done. The organisation has grown exponentially over the last 3 to 5 years. So great example of succession planning working, bringing outside skills in. The other example is a oil distribution business in East London. So again, quite specialised. And there it was the founder, managing director, recognised this challenge of succession and put together a training development programme for his son and 2 other managers that he had in his business. And in fact, he used the management apprenticeship in order to equip them with the business skills they need. And he's been able to, over the course of 3 years, he's been able to develop their skill set and at the same time take a step back from the day-to-day running of the business in order to enable that succession. So I think it's really important for businesses, whether they're family owned or not, to think about, okay, so what next? And actually, how do you create that management core in your business of talent that is able to run the business in the future? Because that makes for a really strong business. Business that is wholly dependent on the founder.
And it's so hard in a small business. As you say, if you've got 7 people, it's very hard to plan through that, but it's really vital in kind of longevity and sustainability, isn't it? And I feel like we could talk for another 2 hours about this subject. I don't think we've even hardly scratched the surface, but I really appreciate your time.
It's been great talking to you.
And I am going to definitely rethink the description of SMEs.
Let's not use that. Let's
ban it.
Let's do a Room 101 moment where we just bin the term
Exactly,
SME.
but I think the key things to take out of today, the real actions that businesses do have in their power to take. There's a lot of help and available resources out there. That's one thing. Secondly, that it is worth the time. It is part of running your business to think about this stuff, and just to share that both of us as small business owners can really say that it's an important priority to keep on the agenda, but say that with absolute respect to people that run small businesses, because we know that it's tough, and right now it's super tough. So thank you very much for your time, and I really appreciate your extremely thoughtful comments. So that's the end of our first podcast. I am Martha Lane Fox, Chancellor of the Open University and President of the British Chambers of Commerce.